Sunshines! Today I am here to talk to you about a beautiful, beautiful book that I just recently finished reading. All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. This book has won quite a few prizes. It was the winner of the Pulitzer Prize. It was a National Book Award finalist. It has made the top 10 best books by the New York Times of 2014. And unless I read something incredibly, exceptionally compelling this year, I'm fairly certain that this is going to be my favorite read of 2016. All the Light We Cannot See is an adult historical fiction set during one of my favorite time periods to read about, and that is the World War II era. In this book, we follow two main character perspectives. The first is a young blind girl who is called Marie-Laure, and she lives in Paris with her father, who works at the Natural History Museum as the locksmith and keykeeper of the museum. I wouldn't say her life is cushy by any means, but she is surrounded by a lot of natural beauty in the sense that she is able to explore her city that is a beautiful, wonderful city thanks to a 2-scale model that her father has created for her so she can understand how the city is laid out, and it really helps her. And she also has all of this wonderful history and natural history and creatures and artifacts surrounding her, and a lot of very educated, very incredible, knowledgeable scholars at her fingertips who she spends lots of time with learning about their areas of study. Because Marie's father works for the Natural History Museum, there's actually sort of a little bit of a mysterious element to this book as well, because the museum is actually the keeper of a very rare artifact that is said to kind of almost be a myth, and it's called the Sea of Flames, and it is this 130 carat jewel. Essentially, the folklore goes that whoever is in possession of this jewel is indestructible, but those around them will be impacted in a very negative way. It's this really interesting thing where when the war actually starts to escalate and the Germans start to occupy Paris, Marie and her father end up fleeing Paris, and they are one of 4 individuals that the museum has chosen to take a replica of this jewel. The other character who we follow is a young boy named Werner, who lives in a city called Zollverein, which is just outside of Essen in Germany. And Zollverein is actually a coal mining city. Werner is an orphan because his father and mother both died. They lived very short lives because his father was a coal miner, and unless something incredibly drastic comes along and alters the course of Werner's life, he is also destined to become a coal miner and most likely also live a rather short life. Werner does not live alone. He lives in a home that is run by a wonderful lady that we come to know as Frau Elena. He also lives with his younger sister, who is called Jutta, and they have a pretty simple life. One day he and his sister find a radio, and come to find out, Werner is actually quite technologically savvy. He's very intelligent, and he ends up fixing this radio. And before long, his reputation as a radio repairman precedes him, and he becomes sort of the go-to radio repairer in his town. Our two characters' lives sort of take off in completely opposite directions. When the Germans begin to occupy Paris, Marie and her father flee Paris to a city called Saint Malo. They end up moving in and living with Marie's great uncle, Etienne. And for Werner, since he has become well known as an intelligent radio repair man in his city, one of the radios he actually repairs in this time is the radio of the wife of a German officer in the army, and that sort of begins to propel him in a direction where he ends up being invited to attend a state school, which is essentially what we would think of as Hitler's youth. And he ends up being accepted to and going to attend, and this is intended to really set him up for success to be a super educated and intelligent German soldier for the German army. In the book, there's a character that refers to the war through the analogy of the boiling frog. And if you guys aren't familiar with the boiling frog analogy, essentially it is that if you put a frog in a pot of boiling water, the frog will jump out because the water is too hot. But if you put a frog in a pot of cool water and then slowly bring the water to a boil, the frog will end up dying and boiling because its temperature adjusts and it just doesn't know that it's being boiled. And so this character refers to the war this way, of how it kind of gradually builds, and the author really draws on that analogy, and you can see that throughout this book. The story arc that this book takes is sort of right before the war and just as the war is starting, escalating through the war, and then actually somewhat after the war ends as well. And we get to follow these characters through the majority of their lives, from children to adulthood and somewhat beyond. I don't want to go into too much detail because I don't want to spoil anything, but it's a very intricately woven and well thought out, very well arced story. Werner and Marie are not the only characters we interact with in this book. There are a couple other, I would say probably a handful of perspectives that we get throughout this story, and they are very gently woven in. You know, I didn't quite know what to expect going into this book. I've read more than my fair share of historical fiction that takes place during World War II, as well as nonfiction. It's an era that really interests me, and I couldn't really tell you why, but I was really pleased to walk away having discovered that this book doesn't really deal with the war in the way that you might expect it to deal with the war. I think it would have been very easy for this book to fall into sort of the formula that a lot of historical fiction books about this era take, which is intensely following all of these sort of really big picture things, and this book doesn't do that. It keeps you at a very granular level where you see human interaction and the way that people interacted with one another during the war, the way that neighbors interacted with neighbors, and the way that people thought. And you know, there isn't a gigantic fear aspect either. There's definitely worry and concern and undertones of that, but it's because it starts out with Werner and Marie as they are children, there's this very interesting dichotomy that you begin with of them not quite understanding the full magnitude of what's happening around them. And you get to follow them and grow with them and learn with them as the war sort of escalates and they grow and they learn more about what's happening in the world around them. And I thought that was a really fascinating approach to take, and I really, really, truly appreciated it. As far as the characters go and the world building goes, this book is so beautifully written. The characters are completely, fully realized and whole and diverse and so very intricate. Every single character that you interact with, you understand as a whole person, and that is such a difficult thing for an author to achieve. I am so impressed. The writing style is also very, very beautiful. The way that he uses words is very, very beautiful, though I've told a couple people that I feel that even though it's easy to read his sentences, they feel a bit like prose at times. It's just, the imagery is incredible. The imagery that he's able to capture is incredible. It is a little bit of a slow start. I feel like it was probably around 100 or 150 pages out of this 530 page book before I really started feeling like the action was picking up. There was a lot of scene setting, and honestly, I feel like that isn't a bad thing. Now, having read the book and understanding the scope of the story and the way that he wanted to approach the war in general, it makes a lot of sense, because there's definitely this slow burn that escalates until all of a sudden there's an explosion and everything is on fire. And I really couldn't think of a better way to have written the war, because if you think about it, that's really how it happened. There were a lot of little tiny things, these little tiny things that if you think about them one by one are not super meaningful and super impactful, but as they got added on one after the other, that's how they ended up. That's how we ended up where we ended up with the war. And this book does an incredible job of laying that out for us. Wow, I have nothing but good things to say about this book. I was incredibly moved by this book. I was so engaged with the characters, all of them. Another reviewer mentioned how there's a lot of gray area in this book, that no character is completely good or completely bad, and I couldn't agree more. every character does things that are somewhat questionable, and would we label them as bad? No. And the same thing as far as the characters that act in a way that we might consider good. Every character has both of those elements. You were living in this gray area with these characters, but aside from a couple of people who really stood out as sort of being the menacing characters, as it were, you are able to rationalize with the characters why they made the decisions that they made. All of them. Even though Werner ends up at this school training to become a Nazi soldier and eventually does become a Nazi soldier in the war, you're able to see the internal struggle that he has with the fact that he doesn't necessarily agree with everything that's happening to him and everything that he's being told to believe. For Werner, it was an opportunity at a better life, and even taking that opportunity, he questioned it. And for Marie, as she learns to become independent in this world that is by the day becoming more and more and more against her, and tries to find herself among the rubble really of the world around her, it's an incredibly moving story. I'm getting exceptionally long-winded about this story, but as you can see, I have nothing but good things to say. This book was a 5 out of 5 stars for me on Goodreads. I love this book. This book was so incredible. I will probably end up rereading it. I'm really not sure when, but I feel like maybe I missed something. Like maybe if I go back, there will be something else that I can discover or rediscover about it, because the story was just that in depth and that intricate. There's a lot of different time frame changes that happen as well, which were just so beautifully done. And over the course of this book, you get to see how these two incredibly different characters' lives are actually so much more interwoven than they could have ever known, and really as a reader you could have ever known. So I thought it was beautiful. It was so touching. It was so moving. If you get a chance, read this book. I cried, I laughed a little bit, and it stayed with me. I needed a day or two after I finished it to just kind of decompress and let it all soak in, because when it ended, it just kind of ended and left it a little bit of a void in me where this beautiful story and this beautiful moment had been. I just kind of needed a day to recover from the wonderfulness that was this book. Let me know in the comments down below if you have read this book and what your thoughts were. Thank you guys all so much for watching. I hope you all have magical days, and I will see you in my next video. Bye! My entire head of bleaching and lifting, and it sounds like Pinky Hostess Friday afternoon tea collaboration. It's a tea themed, of course, with Pride and